Gold, Big West, Tatsunoko, Suzuki Nui, or any of the other companies that officially own these intellectual properties. However, I have worked with Harmony Gold on several projects. I do know pretty much everyone that works there, and my name is in the credits for pretty much every official Robotech product on the table here, with the exception of this, which was made when I was 13. So, anyway, that's who I am. Let's find out who you guys are. So I would like to see where the expert Macross fans that already know everything I'm going to say are. Go ahead and... Okay. And so where are the ones that are here to find out what Macross is and you haven't actually seen it? Okay, we got some of those too. All right. And the rest, I assume, are somewhere in the middle. You've seen some, maybe not all of it. Just curious to see what if I'm going to bash Harmony Gold. Okay. So, moving on, here's what we're going to talk about. We're going to talk about general, what is Macross. We're going to go through a Macross family tree, which I'll have some disclaimers before we go through that. It's going to show the relationship between Robotech and Macross, and show where the spin-offs go and how they're not related to each other. And then I'm going to talk about some of the differences between Robotech and Macross, and then we're going to talk about the gorilla in the room, why you can't find Macross in the U.S.
Unless you go into Amazon Prime.
Actually, yes, it streams on Amazon
for some
Prime.
reason.
Yes. But then we'll talk about some of the sequels and spin-offs, and I have some clips from those. Actually, just 2 clips from each of my favorites. And then I'll take questions. So,
favorites, you mean plus and plus?
Plus is one of my favorites. All right, so what is Macross? Macross is basically a mecha anime, and it started in the early 80s. Every basic spin-off or sequel, prequel that has come out for it has certain elements in common, including transforming fighters, love triangles. It wouldn't be Macross without some kind of a love triangle. An unusually strong focus on music, like to the point of music is what wins the war. And then, let's say, giant spaceships, usually so big they have a city inside with like cars and buildings driving. I mean, it's an entire city. So, moving on. All right, so the Macross universe, basically it begins its alternative history because it was the future when it was first made. But its alternative history starts in 1999 when an alien ship called the Macross crash landed on Earth in a fictitious island called South Atria Island, or Macross Island if you watch Robotech. Between 1999 and 2009, the humans rebuilt the spaceship, back engineered the alien technology, and in 2009 they attempted to launch it when the aliens who owned it, the Zentradi, showed up and wanted the ship back. And rather than just hand it over, we decided that we should have a war with them. And from 2009 to about 2012, almost the entire population of the human and Zentradi species were annihilated. So after that, from 2012 on, we have kind of a joint human and Zentradi society with both races living together and getting along for the most part. And they go on to colonize the galaxy in an attempt to preserve the species, so that if our home world is destroyed, there'll be others to survive. So, the Zentradi, the aliens, are genetically engineered for war. They have no culture other than war. They're segregated by gender, reproduced by cloning, are 40 to 60 feet tall. They can be reduced in size to human size, and for spy missions or to live amongst us. It requires certain technology which is difficult to obtain, and they are susceptible to cultural influence because they have no native culture of their own. When they come across a society like ours, which has music and entertainment and all that, they tend to defect. They want that kind of thing. So, the significance of Macross and Robotech is that along with Gundam, these were some of the first realistic mecha and space anime that ever came out. I mean, you had like Astro Boy and Giant Robo and stuff like that, but none of it attempted to depict real science, real physics, make it look as if it could actually be a real military piece of hardware. So the 3 series, they basically ushered in that genre. In America, where Macross kind of became Robotech. It was responsible in large part for creating the appetite for that kind of animated, like serious dramatic animation in America. And because of that, to a large extent, I'm not saying it wouldn't have happened without Robotech, but because of Robotech, that's why we have all of these cons and, I mean, just the explosion in the popularity of anime in the United States. So, some notable firsts that Macross and Robotech share are a interracial couple between Roy and Claudia, one of the first I know of in animation. We have the first, at least in America, the first realistic depiction of death and the consequences of violence. I mean, you got characters, they die, they don't come back, their family and friends have to deal with that. They go through issues of, it's a war. They realize that they're killing people during this war, and they have to deal with all these issues, and that was never seen before, especially in America, because you had stuff like Transformers, and you had stuff like G.I. Joe, but we all know that G.I. Joe always ejected from his fighter right before the missile hit, so they never had to deal with these issues. Robotech, not Macross, also had, as far as I know, other than like Fred Flintstone wearing Wilma's dress or something like that, had the first cross-dressing, like a main character that cross-dressed. So that was only in the third generation, of Robotech, which has nothing to do with Macross. But I thought I'd bring it up.
So we're talking Mas Bayetta then?
Yes.
Okay.
Which is also available on Amazon Prime.
Yes, it is.
Like all three are like there, and I was so surprised. I was like, what?
So what is Robotech? So you got Macross. The original series, Super Dimension Fortress Macross, was too short for any American television company to pick up in the mid-'80s. They wanted longer series. There was only 35 episodes in the original Macross, and they wouldn't touch it. So a guy named Carl Masick, love him or hate him, I can see some smirks, but he decided to extend the series by tacking on two other completely unrelated anime, Super Dimension Cavalry Southern Cross and Genesis Climber Mospeada. And he did that by basically tweaking the plot so that the characters in each successive anime were the next generation from the previous anime. So a lot of the characters in Southern Cross were retconned to be the kids from Macross, and so on and so forth. So
At least he gave a fairly faithful dub for the time from Macross, which
okay,
is what he wanted.
Macross, yes. Southern
The other
Cross is
two,
almost
no.
unrecognizable from its original. It was changed. I mean, they changed the order of the episodes. They took scenes from different episodes and put them in other episodes. It was crazy how much they changed up that. It didn't even take place on Earth. It was on a planet that had 2 moons, and they edited out every scene that had a picture of both moons. So, both Macross and Robotech have sequels that do share characters, but not history or storyline. So, Rick Hunter, who was Hikaru Chijo in Macross, he goes on and he reappears in, say, the Shadow Chronicles sequel for Robotech. But what he's been doing for the last 20 years has nothing to do with anything that happened in Macross. So, if you like the characters, you might want to check out the sequels for Robotech, but don't expect to know what's going on if you haven't watched Robotech. So, all right, here's my family tree, and I should have brought a laser pointer, but I'll just stand up and point. So, in Japan, we had 3 unrelated series, all right? Now, if we follow this tree here, you'll see that they were combined, boom, all 3 of them were combined into what became Robotech in America. Now, I meant to put another one up here, but I'll just have to mention it without showing. So, in 1986, Harmony Gold created a sequel, Robotech 2 the Sentinels, which was a direct follow-on to the Macross saga of Robotech. Almost all of the Macross characters appear in the Sentinels sequel. Unfortunately, because of the change in the value between the dollar and the yen at the time, they were unable to afford to finish the series, so they took the episodes that they had created and put it into a feature-length film. That was followed chronologically, not necessarily in the order it was put out, by this right here, Robotech Love, Live Alive, which actually just came out a couple of years ago. And that, in the timeline, fits in basically after the Sentinels and before the Shadow Chronicles. And 80% plus of this movie is a recap of the 3rd generation of Robotech. As a matter of fact, you could just watch this and you've seen the third generation, it must be the saga. It has, however, 20 minutes of brand new footage, never before seen footage in there. So you get a little bit more, you see a little bit more, especially for the character of Lancer, who was the cross-dresser. You get a lot of his background, which wasn't seen in the series. And then, timeline-wise, Robotech: The Shadow Chronicles follows on after the entire series, after everything. This is basically the most recent thing in the storyline that's out right now. That came out about 2007. And it mostly features the characters from Mospeada. It only has a couple of characters and a few that are related to the Macross characters. So if we follow the Macross line here, one of the first things that came out was Do You Remember Love? And that was basically, with a few changes, a little bit added, it was basically a retelling of the original series. But it was freaking gorgeous. For the 1980s, the animation is eye-poppingly gorgeous.
The Do You Remember Love sequence.
Well, I don't know if I particularly like the changes that they made, or if, but you gotta watch it if you love Macross because the animation is just incredible. So, then we have something that came out called Macross 2 Lovers Again, which was kind of strange, because as I've already mentioned, the Zentradi don't have any culture of their own, and yet Macross 2 features singing Zentradi. It's kind of weird, all right? Matter of fact, it was so weird that it was pretty much decanonized. It's cool. It's not your normal Macross. It features the main character, Hibiki Kanzaki, who is not a fighter pilot. He's a reporter. And basically, he flies around filming the war. He follows a fighter pilot. He meets one of these scenes in Zentradi. There gets to be a love triangle, of course. So you got your music, you got your fighters, and you got your love triangle. So definitely textbook Macross, but with singing Zentradi. Then we have Macross Plus. And before anyone says it, I'm aware that there's other stuff that came out. I'm aware that there are video games, and there are spin-offs, and there are sequels that I'm not talking about. But I'm just going with the major titles. And if it's like Macross Frontier that had movies made from it, they sprang from it, I'm not going into that because I don't have time. I'm just hitting the basic, like the big ones. So, Macross Plus, you got your love triangle, and the two guys here are test pilots developing the next transforming fighter for the military. And very notably about the series, besides it just being gorgeously animated, having a really good story, it is almost certainly the origin of the idea for a Vocaloid. It has a singer, Sharon Apple, who is completely computer generated, and she does concerts. It's a little bit more surreal than, Hatsune Miku, but it's definitely a Vocaloid. And she goes crazy and she tries to take over the world. And that's really, really cool. You should definitely watch it. You don't have to have seen any other Macross in order to watch this and enjoy it, because it doesn't go into the big overarching story. It just follows these three characters and their interactions, and you don't have to know much about Macross, except that this guy's a Zentradi. And moving on.
Miku fans should take note there.
All right, so what we got going on here, we're going to continue to follow the Macross line to one that I hope will be decanonized.
I will fight for 7. It is a glorious project.
Macross 7 went overboard with the music element, all right? It went so far that you got guys piloting their fighters by using musical instruments and singing.
Yes.
Am I wrong?
No.
No, that's just too weird for me. You've gone
It's
too
amazing.
far. Okay.
I'd also like to make the point that Dynamite 7 is excellent, and I am aware you're not going to talk about direct things, but
Yes.
the direct timeline of Macross, Dynamite 7 is considered like a key part because the race is shown that is nowhere else, and so Dynamite 7 mega important because of this extra race. Continue. Sorry.
Okay. Moving on, we're going to go back in time with Macross
Yes.
Zero, which is actually a prequel to the entire Macross saga. It starts off basically when there are no transforming fighters, and it's got the introduction of the transforming fighters that have been back engineered from the alien technology. The main character actually is flying an actual F-14 Tomcat when he gets shot down by a transforming fighter, and spends most of the rest of the series on this Pacific island where he meets some native inhabitants that seem to know a lot more about the alien race that developed all of this than they should. So it's interesting for him to find out what's going on there. Then we have my personal favorite, Macross Frontier, And that's basically, I think it takes place in about 2064.
It's exactly 50 years after the
Yes.
original series, I believe.
And this is basically following a colony ship, one of those colony ships that's going out to transplant the human race onto another world. And they run into an alien race which is not the Zentradi. It's quite different from the Zentradi. It's got your love triangle, it's got your music, it's got two singers as a matter of fact. And this guy is in between them because, hey, that's what happens in Macross. It's got your transforming fighters, it's got gigantic ships with an entire city, farms, lakes, everything inside this ship. And it is beautifully animated, and the music is absolutely incredible. You can't really fully enjoy it unless you've seen the original series. You can watch it and you can enjoy it, but there are a lot of callbacks and in-jokes and references to things that happened in the original series that if you have seen that, you'll be like, oh, hell yeah. But,
There are references to 7 too.
there's actually references to Zero as well.
Oh, because of the movie that they made.
Yes, they make a movie.
Yeah.
In this series, they make a
talk about
movie
those
of this
things.
series.
Yeah.
And so, as a matter of fact, it really confused me when I started that episode, and I'm like, I'm watching the right
Also,
series.
the band in 7 is referenced in one of the movie versions
Macross
of
Delta
Frontier,
being
like
basically
super.
But my point is, you
yeah.
can still enjoy it without
Oh, yeah.
having seen the
Oh
rest.
yeah. Mm-hmm.
And then finally, we got Macross Delta, which seriously just came out. I think it ended its run in September of last year. I've heard nothing but good things about it. I haven't personally seen it. It's got your music element because apparently there's this disease that's driving people crazy, and music is the only solution to keep them, from going crazy. I don't think that's going too far. I think that's pretty cool. I'm gonna give it a chance.
I should give it a better chance.
I'm prepared to like it.
The first episode has breakdancing cross robots.
That's interesting.
It's the best dance
Yeah.
sequence in.
Now, what you're
Macross.
probably wondering is what the heck this is that's going on down here. If we continue from the Robotech line, we get to this right here, and basically Sony Pictures has bought the rights to create a Robotech movie, a live-action Robotech movie, and they have announced that it will be based on the Macross saga. They haven't said whether they're going to try to capture the entire Macross saga or just some portion of the Macross saga. Something else we know is that James Wan is going to be directing it. He is currently directing Aquaman, and he has announced that his next project after Aquaman is going to be Robotech. This is not footage from the movie. This is actually footage from a fan film, which is incredible. And if you'd like to learn more about it, come and talk to me at my table in the Artist Alley. All right, so some differences. Actually, the Macross saga of Robotech and Super Dimension Fortress Macross are not that different. A lot of names have been changed to protect the innocent. For instance, Hikaru became Rick, almost certainly because these names were easier for kids in the 1980s to assimilate. Some names did stay the same, such as Roy, such as Claudia. Some of them were just slightly tweaked, like Misa became Lisa. The Valkyries became Veritex. So a lot of changes in terminology, but only one key change that I consider a key change in the plot is that protoculture, which plays a huge role in Macross, has been changed to nothing more than a liquid that the mecha runs off of. It's a power source. The Zentradi were created by a race called the Robotech Masters, which are the main bad guys in the second generation of Robotech. The Invid and Robotech Master races do not appear in Macross whatsoever, have nothing to do with it. And capital ships in Robotech are usually called SDF class ships. You got SDF 1, 2, 3, all the way up to the SDF 7 Liberator. Whereas in Macross, gigantic ships are called Macrosses. You have more than one Macross. It's not just this ship right here. So protoculture in Macross is actually an ancient race of super advanced aliens, and they are responsible for genetically engineering several other races that exist in the galaxy, including humans and the Zentradi. So there's also this mysterious supervision army, which I really wish we got more of. But it's mentioned several times. You maybe see a ship every once in a while, but they really don't go into it nearly as much as I think they really should have. Delta?
Delta.
Excellent.
Really?
Excellent.
Okay, fine, I'll watch Delta.
So, But this Supervision Army was kind of like a inspiration for the Robotech Masters in Robotech. Kind of a Overwatch of the Zentradi, they whatever. So the Robotech Masters, they inherited that role. And then finally, let's see, what do we got? Oh yeah, Robotech and Macross, I've already mentioned this. The originals are very, very close. Sequels diverge ridiculously. Nothing to do with each other. So, why can't I find this in America? Why can't you go out and buy a Blu-ray of Macross Frontier? Except for like these ones that you get from like the Philippines or something.
That's
Delta-
Malaysia.
Malaysia, yes.
Delta actually has English subs in the Japanese Blu-ray releases.
Excellent.
Delta did finally put.
So here's the reason you can't find this stuff, or at least the reason it's very difficult to find anything after Macross Plus. There are 4 companies involved, one being Harmony Gold, who owns the exclusive distribution rights worldwide for all Macross properties, so they claim. All right, except within Japan. All right, in Japan, this all just belongs to its own original creators. There is a contract. Harmony Gold does have, on paper, the rights to distribute Macross internationally, but that was created when there was just the original series, so the real legal
What does
issue
Macross
is,
mean?
does that mean all Macross ever created, or just the original series? Well, their lawyers say all of it. All right, so then we've got Big West. All right, Big West is an advertising company. They bankroll the Macross saga. They pay for the production, all right? So, as such, they also have claim to be co-owners of the story and the characters. Because, you know, they're dishing out the money, they should have the rights to say what happens to it. Tatsunoko is an animation studio. They're the ones that actually drew the series, or at least some of it, most of it. All right, and basically they own the physical animation, and as such they can license it to whoever they want, and they licensed it to Harmony Gold. Actually, Harmony Gold and Tatsunoko have a very good working relationship, and they've worked on several projects since Macross, and they get along really well. All right, so they also, yeah, as I mentioned, Designs and Mecha kind of falls into their area as well because they own the animation. And then Studio Nui is co-owner of stories and characters. They actually own basically the designs. They did the character designs, they did the mecha designs. Shoji Kawamori, actually, who works for them, did all of that stuff. And so they also have a quarter of the claim to what happens to this series. And they don't all agree on what should happen. So, we did get the following